Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game chock full of mysteries, and over the years some have been solved, some are just up to interpretation with no clear answer, and others still, I don't believe, have satisfying answers to them. And today I want to look at one of those, that of course being Fort Riggs, one of the most tragic and heartbreaking places in the game, but also one of the most mysterious, as many theories have gone around it, and while I think for the most part we've gotten a good chunk of Fort Riggs down pat, I think there's a little bit more to it that hasn't done full justice to what I believe to be one of the coolest yet most heartbreaking places in the game. Now, before we start the video, remember if you do enjoy and you want more content like this, be sure to check out that big red subscribe button right underneath the video. Also gotta thank my channel members. You guys help make these videos possible. If you want to join, get access to the exclusive perks that they get, then be sure to check out that blue join button. Anyway, let's begin. Now, on the surface, Fort Riggs is believed to be an homage to the Wounded Knee Massacre, which takes place in December of 1890 in Wounded Knee, South Dakota. Essentially what was happening was settlers in the area were disturbed by reports of the ghost dance taking place in Wounded Knee, and the US Army sent a regiment up there to disarm the tribe. If you're not familiar with what the ghost dance is, essentially it was a sort of doomsday religion where, as the resources for the Native Americans were dwindling, they felt the spirits of their ancestors would bring about floods and earthquakes that would get rid of the white man, and they would be led to bountiful lands where things like the buffalo would be in abundance and they could live in peace. Ultimately, of course, this would never happen for the Native Americans of the area, and in this specific instance there was a massacre. At Wounded Knee, the event that kicked it off was a soldier was trying to take away the weapons from a deaf Native American named Black Coyote. He wouldn't give it up, and the weapon went off, thus beginning the massacre. Overall, about 300 casualties were suffered on the side of the Native Americans, about 250 of which would come as a result of fighting, and another 50 would come as a result of wounds after the fighting, and this includes men, women, and children, all involved in this massacre. One of the most tragic events in US history, and definitely the most tragic of westward expansion. Now, there are a couple things that we can see in game that seem to really show reference to this. Now, of course, there is the veteran that you can find in a random encounter out in the woods, and if you give him some whiskey and sit down with him, he'll tell you his experience at Fort Riggs as a soldier there. Now, he does talk about money, and some people have interpreted it as Fort Riggs was this sort of education project there, this weird reservation. You can find shackles and things inside of the schoolhouse where you find the letter that talks about learning English. And so it seems like some people have turned that into, there was some project going on around educating the Native Americans and becoming like the white people, and when the money ran out, then they decided to kill them all. I don't think it's that. I think what this veteran is talking about may have more to do with either he was getting a bonus in the army to be someone who guards the place, or maybe as the army was suspicious of a potential ghost dance going on, they brought in mercenaries, and he was one of those mercenaries that was brought in, and they paid well for that thing to happen. Either way, he was there and he was involved in the massacre, and he's deeply scarred by what he saw there with the massacre, and he was paid in some way to be there. Now, I can also do some confirmation of my theory. If you go into the Fort Riggs camp, you can see these little circles where there seem to have been fires, and around these fires you can find bottles of alcohol, you can find plates of food, and it looks like something was happening around here just before the massacre struck. Now, could it have been the paranoia of the US soldiers seeing them start this ghost dance and going about killing them, or could it have been something where, similar to what happened at Wounded Knee, there was a misunderstanding and things just go really bad? There's no real answer for that, but I do believe that there was something that caused at least some suspicion in the camp by the US soldiers. I think we also see that with the poem that we find inside the camp. You're not aware, that letter that you find inside the schoolhouse that's about learning English. You can actually translate it by taking the first letter of each word, and you can turn that into a poem. The poem reads, "Wazia comes with winter breath. His trees stand guard, whispering all night that we sleep in our grave. Father fought and died so quickly. Mother Dies Slow. Now, some people have tried to tie this in with Bigfoot and giants, and they tried to point to the Bigfoot carving among the trees with the other faces that is west of Owanjila, but to me, it doesn't really tie too much with Fort Riggs. The face that's supposedly Bigfoot does face the two other locations of giants in the game, and it doesn't really do much to tie in with Fort Riggs. I think you need to look at what Wazia is, and not take it quite so literally. In native Dakota folklore, Wazia is a giant of the north who brings disease and famine in the wintertime. He blows cold air down, and that's what causes winter and all the other things that come along with it. And I think a very simple interpretation is Wazia is just a metaphor for the US federal government and their westward expansion. Number one, because the massacre happens in wintertime, and number two, because they're in this encampment, likely disease and famine is happening inside the camp, and this will point towards the second event that I think this fort pays homage to, that I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think the very simple interpretation is the federal government. It is a giant, and it is blowing across the continent, moving the natives off of their land. And with it comes disease, death. Is tree stand guard whispering all night that we sleep in our grave? Likely that is someone inside of the camp hearing through the wooden planks on the outside, that being the planks would be kind of like the trees because they're lumber, but the guards are on the outside of the camp. They can probably hear them whispering outside of there how if something goes wrong or they're suspicious of them, that they'll go in there and they will kill them. I'm sure the guards weren't being very kind to them. Let's be honest. Just look at history. And then Father fought and died so quickly, and Mother Dies Slow refers to the 250 Native American men, women, and children who were killed fighting, and then the other 50 is referred to with the Mother Dies Slow, who died of their wounds after the fighting. All, of course, is extremely sad and very tragic. Now, one thing you might point to is, well, Wounded Knee did not take place inside of a fort like this, and we could just chalk that up to the game having to have some reason where you could lock this into a certain location and make it not seem quite so random. It adds a little bit more interest to have a couple of structures here in this mysterious way. But I think this does also pay homage to another event that would have happened long before 1890, but for the sake of in the game, they can tie it all in one place. That, of course, being the Trail of Tears. The Trail of Tears was an event in 1838 where Native American tribes in the American East were moved westward via forced removal. It was one of the most tragic events in US history, and another one of the most tragic of westward expansion. There's a couple of things that makes me think this. Number one, along the Trail of Tears, they would put a lot of the members of the Native American tribes inside of forts similar to this, where they would stop off, and then when it was time to move on, they would keep moving them down the way. Along the way, many natives who were being moved off their land in the east out to the west would die of famine and disease, as of course they were walking thousands of miles to get to these new reservations in the far west. Which of course brings me to my other point to why this could be a reference to the Trail of Tears. It is located at the game's equivalent of the gateway to the west. This is the furthest western point for this section of the map that we can access in the main game, until of course in the prologue you can go out into New Austin and further into West Elizabeth. You could even also look at the Wapiti Indian Reservation being up in the northeastern section of the map, and Fort Riggs being in the southwestern section of the map. You could see that as natives being moved westward. Now, I know the Wapiti Indian Reservation is already a reservation where they had been potentially moved to, but also we are way off of where Dakota land would have been, and judging by the references to Wazia and a lot of the tribes in the game being Dakota, this is not Dakota land very clearly. All that being said, I have to say that Fort Riggs, with this information, is easily the most tragic place in the entire game. It is absolutely heartbreaking, and I think this explanation fulfills the mystery and the sadness that comes with the visual impact that Fort Riggs has upon you when you do first stumble upon it. But let me know down below what you think. Do you think potentially there could be something supernatural going on here? Do you think it was a much more grounded and tragic explanation as to what happened here, or do you think it's a combination of both? Let me know down below, let's have a conversation, and I will see you in the next video.